Last year, the amount of money spent on lobbying hit a record $5.24 billion at the federal level alone. And well, I don't know if you realized, but there weren't even any major federal elections in 2025. When you factor in the upcoming midterms, state and local level lobbying in addition to all of the money spent outside of officially disclosed channels, the volume of cash that is, enabling the lawmaking process is going to eclipse 11 figures within America alone this year. And by all accounts, it's going to be a great investment. A Cambridge University report found that out of 1,779 policy issues passed during their study, the preferences of economic elites and special business interests had a significant influence on policy outcomes, which wasn't really the shocking part. The shocking part was that the preferences of average citizens had effectively no measurable influence, even in large groups that were extremely politically active. Oh, and this study was done in 2014, when total political spending was less than a quarter of what it is today. Part of the reason why that spending has become so ludicrous is not because the money is being used to circumvent the will of the people. That battle was won long ago. It's instead becoming a spending battle between other lobbyists to see whose special interest takes precedence over the lesser donors. Now, I know the problem of political lobbying is not exactly a surprise to anybody anymore. Even here on this channel, whenever we cover broken business models, from private equity, private credit, corporate farming subsidies, the gambling epidemic, data center subsidies, corporate consolidation, healthcare, the housing market, how you fund a retirement, and all the way down to something as mundane as how we collect economic data, political lobbying is, at least part of, the reason why things have become so clearly messed up. But I promise you, however bad you think it's gotten, it's worse. We tend to think that money in politics begins and ends with how much our elected officials can pump into silly campaign ads and how many lobbyists an industry group can pay to stock the halls of the Capitol. But even if we were to somehow reform this in its entirety tomorrow, we only need to look to other countries to see it's probably not going to fix all of our problems. Oh, and of course, this is all assuming that everybody was actually playing by those rules in the first place.
But when it comes to money in politics, which groups give the most?
In 2025, OpenAI and Anthropic, valued at $830 billion and $380 billion respectively, escalated their federal lobbying efforts.
Hospitals, insurers, doctors, unions, and pharmaceutical companies spent a record $19 million lobbying Beacon Hill lawmakers last year.
National Association of Realtors at $54 million, and the Business Roundtable at $27 million.
The American political system is broken, it is corrupt, it is significantly owned by the billionaire class.
Okay, so there's a lot of money going into American politics. I know, that alone isn't surprising. But the headline spending numbers, adding up to a mere $10 billion and change, are really just the basic prices. The actual bill is a lot bigger, and most of it never shows up on the receipt of public disclosure. To see this, we should start with the most obvious sources of money in finance, and then work our way down to the most discreet. So yeah, kicking off with direct campaign contributions. Most people think that money in politics is only writing big checks to politicians so they can fund their increasingly expensive political campaigns. Now, elections have absolutely become more expensive. Advertising directed by staffers is almost unavoidable at this point, and presidential candidates in particular are increasingly flying private and running huge teams to manage longer and more grandiose campaigns. But despite what it may look like, there are actually pretty strict limits on how much any individual person can give to these candidates. Currently, the Federal Election Commission cap on contributions to any federal level elected official, including the president, is $3,500 per election. So the primary and the general election, meaning the absolute most a single person can give to a candidate in one election cycle, is $7,000. The rules on this are strict and they are actually enforced. Additionally, individual contributors have to be real natural people. So if you were thinking you could just route your contributions through 1,000 shell companies, congratulations, you are starting to think like a political lobbyist. But in this particular case, that is not allowed. Now, $7,000 from an individual is a lot of money for most people. But in the grand scheme of most election campaigns, it is really just a drop in the bucket, and is unlikely to be enough on its own to sway any policy at this level. You may occasionally hear the phrase, "I can't believe how little Congresspeople will sell themselves out for," when news breaks that a couple paid $10,000 to a campaign and it looks like they got tailored legislative treatment. In reality, that is normally just what is being disclosed through official campaign contributions, and there is normally a lot more money involved behind the scenes. Direct contributions to a single campaign are just the most obvious, most regulated, most reported, and arguably least problematic way that money gets into politics. Most people cannot write $3,500 checks every election cycle, but enough people do make contributions that it is very difficult for any single wealthy donor to stand out based on their direct spending alone. Now, the one exception to the FEC cap is that candidates can put as much of their own money as they want into their own campaign, and significantly wealthy figures from both sides of the aisle like Michael Bloomberg and Donald Trump have both campaigned on their ability to do this. Bloomberg put roughly $936 million of his own money into his unsuccessful 2020 presidential campaign, which lasted about 100 days, making it by far the most expensive per-day campaign in American history. Trump contributed over $56 million into his own 2016 campaign and made it a big point that this would separate him from other politicians who need to keep their donors happy. Though, according to public disclosures, he didn't contribute any of his own money in 2020 or 2024. Now, get used to hearing this, but even through direct contributions, there are still some loopholes. Individual contribution limits are $7,000, but there is a very popular workaround called a joint fundraising committee, not to be confused with my fellow broke dorm room friends back in college who went by the same name. These allow a single donor to write one enormous check that gets split across a candidate, a national party, and multiple state parties all at once, filling up the limits across all of these categories in a single transaction. In the 2024 cycle, a single donor could legally contribute over $800,000 through one of these arrangements. It's not great, but this alone is far from the biggest reason why money in politics has gotten so out of control. The $7,000 cap only applies to direct contributions, and even with a multiple six-figure workaround, this money pales in comparison to what is now being contributed very openly by wealthy individuals through super PACs, which have no cap at all. Now, PACs, or political action committees, are organizations that can support a specific interest like a political campaign, and were really just meant as a way for supporters to organize and make their voices collectively heard. Regular PACs also have limits on how much they are allowed to spend. Super PACs are technically distinct from regular PACs. Legally, they aren't actually technically PACs at all. Instead, they are officially classified as independent expenditure-only committees, which might sound like nerdy legal technicalities, but it means that they can take in unlimited amounts of money and spend unlimited amounts of money on any issue they see fit, including the election of individuals or the passing of specific laws. This freedom to spend all they want comes on the one specific condition that they do not directly coordinate with the political campaign that they are supporting, and even this lowest of bars gets pretty openly ignored. These were the groups that were enabled by the Citizens United ruling in 2010, which established that political spending is protected free speech under the First Amendment. The idea is that people with specific political concerns should be allowed to use their free speech to push a political agenda, and spending is part of that free speech. But to avoid it becoming just an end-around campaign finance limits, there should be no direct coordination with the campaign itself. This is broken pretty regularly, and to nobody's surprise, pretty flagrantly too. Elon Musk donated roughly $239 million to America PAC in 2024 to support Donald Trump's presidential campaign, making it one of the largest super PAC operations in history. And the no cooperation rule was, the FEC actually issued a ruling that allowed super PACs to coordinate directly with campaigns on door-to-door canvassing operations, which America PAC immediately took advantage of. The campaign's own political director publicly credited Musk's operation with conserving campaign funds by outsourcing field operations to the super PAC, which allowed Trump's campaign to redirect money into ad spending. Now, spending money on ads alone is obviously a big deal that can move elections. Even here on YouTube, the amount of money we make on the platform before major federal elections increases significantly because of how much is being spent on endless campaign ads. But these messages don't actually require that much coordination. The formula for political ads isn't exactly that hard to reverse engineer. Say bad things about the other guy and nice things about your guy. Which means in this space, most super PACs find it a lot easier to keep their legally mandated safe distance. But it's also not the only place where they spend their money. Data collection and processing is a huge part of modern political campaigns. It's also really expensive and a lot harder to hand over without crossing the line of direct collaboration. But even here, there are plenty of groups that, bend these rules. When J.D. Vance was first running for senator in my home state of Ohio, he was heavily supported by one of Peter Thiel's super PACs named Protect Ohio Values. It turns out Thiel has a thing for spending lots of money to collect data on potential voters. Anyway, the only problem was he couldn't just hand that data over to Vance's campaign without it breaking the arm's distance rule of super PACs. So instead, they just uploaded the data to an obscure blog for his campaign team to stumble upon with the hope that nobody else would find it tucked away in an obscure corner of the internet. This was of course challenged for being a pretty blatant flouting of the rules, but the case was ultimately dismissed. Now of course, hopefully it should go without saying that this happens just as much on both sides of the aisle. Democratic-aligned super PACs spent comparable amounts in 2024. Future Forward, a pro-Harris super PAC, raised over $700 million, and their coordination was probably a little bit too close for the spirit of these rules as well. In total, outside spending by super PACs and other independent groups exceeded $4.5 billion in the 2024 cycle, more than double what it was in 2016. Collectively, super PACs alongside direct campaign finance is likely to exceed $10 billion at the federal level this year. It's not great, but at least we know it's actually happening. Because, well, the money we can actually see is far from the biggest problem. So it's time to learn how money works to find out just how deep this goes, why even the most aggressive campaign finance reform probably can't fix it, and why nobody really seems to want to try. If you have watched this channel for any amount of time, you already know that most companies do not actually care about your privacy. They sell your data, they lose your data, and they treat it like a line item on a balance sheet. Which is why this video is sponsored by Cape. We have worked with Cape before, and they have shipped a few new features worth catching you up on. Cape is a privacy-focused mobile carrier that gives you unlimited talk, text, and data, plus a stack of security features no other carrier includes. They recently rolled out an IMSI rotation, which swaps the static subscriber ID your phone broadcasts every 24 hours so carriers and advertisers cannot track you in real time. They have also launched secondary numbers, 2 extra real phone lines built into your plan so you can hand them out for banking or shopping and keep your main line private. And finally, disappearing call logs, which auto-deletes your call and text metadata after 24 hours so there is nothing to leak or sell. Use code HowManyWorks33 for 33% off your first 6 months of Cape. Cape is available on Apple, Google Play, and the Accrescent store. Link in my description. Okay, so campaign donations and super PACs are really just scratching the surface of these issues. The problem is that when you look deeper, it gets much worse. The first level down is what is, not at all sinisterly, known as dark money. Dark money is politically motivated spending that gets redirected through various organizations to push an agenda without any clear disclosure and without any clear source. These are typically structured as 501c4 nonprofits, which under IRS rules are allowed to engage in political activity so long as it is not their primary purpose. This means they can spend up to 49% of their budget on politics and never have to disclose a single donor. The Brennan Center estimates that over $1 billion in dark money was spent in federal elections between 2010 and 2024. And those are just the expenditures that could be tracked. And well, by definition, the thing that makes dark money dark is that most of it can't be. A major example that we have covered just recently is Build America AI, which is a dark money organization pushing the idea that America needs to beat China in AI, which very clearly feeds into the business interests of hyperscalers and AI labs that need red tape cut, land allotted for their data centers, and maybe some bailout money in case investor hype dies down. Now obviously this is not great, but at least in this case, their completely transparent motives make them pretty transparent. But the whole point of a dark money group is that you cannot trace the money back to the people who benefit from the policy changes. And this has a few other advantages too. Under federal law, foreign nationals are banned from donating to American political campaigns or PACs. But because 501c4 nonprofits don't have to disclose their donors, there is effectively no mechanism to enforce this for dark money groups. A foreign government or foreign corporation can donate to a 501c4, which then spends that money on American ads with a political agenda, and nobody would ever know. The FEC has acknowledged this loophole exists, yet they have not closed it. And then there are the corporate interests that just throw away the middleman altogether. There is really nothing stopping a major company from just running its own ads pushing a very specific political message. This is happening a lot at the moment, with companies claiming that their AI data centers are going to be great for local economies, running ads in swing districts about job creation and infrastructure investment that look a lot like political endorsements, but technically aren't.
So when work started to slow down, we searched for new opportunities. And we welcome Meta, which opened a data center in our town.
So long as they avoid FEC trigger words like vote for or vote against and don't mention specific legislation, it's really hard to regulate this as political spending over a company just expressing its own interests as protected speech. But it gets worse. Everything we just covered, all of that is really just the price of admission. The thing that actually moves the needle once the politicians are in Washington is lobbying. And lobbying is a very different animal from campaign spending. Lobbyists are, in theory, just concerned citizens with very specific interests about very specific policies. In reality, they are primarily highly paid field experts from elite law firms funded by industry groups to support a very specific agenda. Now, to play devil's advocate a little bit here, a lot of lawmakers are not experts in the things they are creating laws on. So being able to consult with a diverse pool of industry specialists could theoretically avoid designing laws that are just dumb for their specific application. Laws on technology probably shouldn't be exclusively written by an 80-year-old senator who doesn't know the difference between a coding language and their high school transcripts. And that kind of makes sense. But the problem is that almost all of the work of actually drafting legislation gets passed off to these lobbyists, who get to word things exactly how they want and ensure it won't get held up in courts because they are the legal experts. Congressional staffers have openly described how lobbyists will hand them fully written legislative text ready to be introduced. And because the staffers are overworked and under-resourced, they will sometimes file it with barely any changes. So really, in a lot of cases, the lobbying firms are the lawmakers. The lawmakers themselves are just the rubber stamp. Now, there is the widely held assumption that this corporate-funded lobbying is working exclusively to cut red tape and remove regulations. In reality, it is often exactly the opposite. They want to introduce regulation in exactly the right areas to block potential new challengers from entering their market. The pharmaceutical industry is particularly good at this. They spent over $370 million on lobbying in 2024 alone, more than any other industry that year. And a huge chunk of that went towards ensuring that drug pricing regulations are written in a way that protects their existing patent portfolios while making it harder for generic competitors to enter the market. The old team at Micro did a great video on this, explaining how internet providers lobbied against municipalities looking to roll out their own broadband and actually deliver a competitive service. In both cases, getting the right kind of laws passed was a lot more profitable than having no regulations at all. There are now over 14,000 registered lobbyists in Washington alone, which works out to roughly 26 lobbyists for every single elected official in Congress. And if you include the people doing lobbying adjacent work who don't formally register, some estimates put the real number closer to 100,000. And all of this is just the federal level. State legislatures are arguably worse because they get a fraction of the media scrutiny. State-level lobbying disclosure requirements are weaker, staffs are smaller, and individual lobbyists can have an outsized influence on a state representative who might only have 1 or 2 aides and no research budget to independently verify what the lobbyist is telling them. Of course, these people also coordinate the efforts of everything we've already talked about. They can suggest that a given company or industry group would really like this type of legislation, and that conveniently, they are looking to spend a lot of money advertising this issue. A study looking at 93 multinational corporations that lobbied for a single tax provision, the American Jobs Creation Act of 2004, found that those firms spent a combined $283 million on lobbying and received $62.5 billion in tax savings, working out to a return of $220 for every single dollar spent. Those returns have to come from somewhere, and that somewhere is the tax base, the consumer, or the competitor who got regulated out of the market. Now, there is one other reason why lobbying has become such an effective tool against lawmakers. And this other reason also explains one of the other logical questions you may have had so far, which is, why do lawmakers let this happen? Yes, they want their re-election funding, but there are alternative systems to get it. And by just taking a step back, if nobody else had lobbyists to answer to or super PAC money funding their campaigns, it means they wouldn't need it either. They could change these laws because, well, that's literally their job. And so far, it looks like the only reason they don't want to is because the other guy won't do it first. Beyond the weird prisoner's dilemma they have backed themselves into here, it must be recognized that for these lawmakers, constantly begging for campaign funding and playing nice with an army of lobbyists telling them how to do their job has got to be pretty demeaning. So, even if they don't do it for the good of their constituents, surely they would be motivated to reform these laws just to make their own job less humiliating, right? Well, there is one good reason why they don't, and that is the revolving door. elected officials at the federal level are paid well by the standards of average Americans, but not by the standards of the people they interact with on a daily basis. A member of Congress earns $174,000 a year. The median partner at a top lobbying firm in DC earns well over $1 million. A huge unspoken way that money gets into politics is the promise of a cushy job for when they retire or get voted out. This extends well beyond elected officials as well. In our video on corporate consolidation, we found that almost all of the previous FTC chairpersons over the last 2 decades, with the exception of Lena Khan, went on to get high-profile roles at M&A law firms, specifically working on the kinds of deals that the FTC should probably be blocking. So yeah, the person whose job it is to block anti-competitive mergers knows that in 2 years, they will probably be working for the firms doing those mergers. That creates an incentive that no amount of campaign finance reform can fix. Now, the #1 most common career move for elected officials after leaving politics is to become a political lobbyist. In 2025 alone, 866 members of Congress and congressional staffers made the move from Capitol Hill to K Street, a 60% increase over the year before and a new record. In total, roughly half of all former lawmakers end up working as political lobbyists. Jack Abramoff, one of the few lobbyists who has actually been convicted for pushing these flexible laws too far, put it pretty bluntly when he admitted that he would tell a congressional staffer, "When you're done working on the Hill, we'd very much like you to consider coming to work for us." And that was most of his job done. Every request from our office, every request of our clients, everything that we want, they're gonna do. And not only that, they're gonna think of things we can't think of to do it. Former representatives and staffers are the perfect candidates to become lobbyists because they know their way around the Capitol, but also because they are a walking billboard showing every current staffer that playing along with the lobbyists is the path to a 7-figure salary as a lobbyist. Now, to be fair, there are cooling off periods in place. Former members of Congress are technically barred from lobbying for 1 to 2 years after leaving office. But these rules are trivially easy to get around. You can do strategic consulting or government relations advisory work, which is, and I cannot stress this enough, exactly the same thing without technically registering as a lobbyist until this period is up. And well, even if you did somehow fully enforce the cooling off period and close every loophole, it still wouldn't fix the core problem. Because the incentive is baked into the system the moment a staffer realizes that the people they are writing laws for are also the people who are going to sign their next paycheck. But the revolving door at least involves people who used to work in government. The next channel of influence doesn't even require that. Obviously, certain owners of major news outlets have certain political leanings, and they can put weight on candidates to support their incentives or face unfavorable coverage. Now, this one is really hard to quantify, because media influence doesn't show up in any spending report. There is no FEC filing for choose not to cover this story or ran 17 segments on this topic instead of that one. And no, this is not a segue to a ground news ad. But the effects are very real. The media landscape has become so partisan that this is arguably even more important in primaries than in general elections, because the threat of poor coverage from a politically aligned outlet can end a primary campaign before it starts. If you are running as a Republican and can't get onto Fox News, you're kind of cooked. Hypothetically, of course. Social media platforms are now owned by people with very specific political and business interests, and the editorial decisions about what gets amplified, what gets suppressed, and what gets labeled as misinformation are being made by the same people who are pushing for specific policy outcomes. Even companies that are not traditional media can also influence this by suggesting they would feel more comfortable advertising on networks that did or did not push a certain political agenda. I can say from personal experience that even down here at Little Old Works Media Group, we have lost sponsors because we pointed out things like the lunacy surrounding current AI spending and the push for bailouts. This is becoming a very real pressure even at this level. And for better or worse, influencers and independent creators are becoming a political force. And then there's the one that nobody really needs to talk about for very long, because it is exactly what it sounds like. Straight up bribes. Now, this kind of direct corruption isn't as necessary as it used to be, because of all of the other legal channels we just went through. But it does still happen, and enforcement is, to put it generously, relaxed. Senator Bob Menendez was convicted on 16 federal charges in 2024 for accepting gold bars, cash, and a Mercedes-Benz in exchange for official acts. And his colleagues in the Senate only moved to expel him after the conviction, at which point he resigned before a vote could take place. And Menendez isn't alone. In 2024, Business Insider found that over 100 members of Congress or their spouses made stock trades in industries directly affected by their committee work. A senator sitting on the Armed Services Committee buying defense stocks before a major procurement announcement is, well, exactly what it looks like. And the Stock Act that was supposed to prevent this is enforced with fines of $200. $200 on a trade that could net hundreds of thousands is not a deterrent. The uncomfortable truth is that when you line up all 7 of these channels together, the direct contributions, the super PACs, the dark money, the corporate ads, the lobbyists, the revolving door, the media influence, and yeah, the bribes, what you are looking at is a system where the legal options are so effective that the illegal ones are almost redundant. Now, some people have accused me of being a bit of a gloomy goose, so I want to talk about some actual, genuine, real good news here. At a state level, there has been some progress to circumvent the super PAC funding enabled by the Citizens United ruling in several states. And at least in state legislatures, it has received unanimous support from both sides of the aisle. This won't fix all of these problems, and the legal techniques they are using won't work at the federal level without a new Supreme Court ruling. But this is still a step in the right direction. Like always, the big Glizzard beat me to covering this particular topic, so I will leave a link to his video in the description alongside some other articles. Unfortunately, the federal level is going to need a little bit more work. The obvious fix is to close the revolving door, remove the financial incentive for lawmakers to play along, and maybe, hot take alert, actually pay elected officials enough that a lobbying salary isn't a 6-fold raise. Yes, that would cost more money in government salaries, but it would be a drop in the bucket compared to how much money is lost through poor policy. Those 93 companies that spent $283 million on lobbying and got $62.5 billion back did not create that money out of thin air. That money came from somewhere, and that somewhere is the tax base, workers' paychecks, and consumers' wallets. There have been efforts. The For the People Act passed in the House in 2019 and again in 2021 with provisions to require dark money disclosures and tighten revolving door restrictions. It died in the Senate both times. The Disclosed Act, which would have required 501c4 groups to name donors who give them over $10,000, has been introduced in every Congress since 2010. It has never passed. But the only people who could pass these reforms are the exact same people who benefit from the current system. You are essentially asking politicians to vote themselves a stricter set of rules and a permanent ban on the career they were planning to retire into. Now, if you want to see all of these systems actually put together, go and watch this next video to find out why we are already subsidizing AI data centers. And don't forget to like and subscribe to keep on learning how money works.